ready to do a little rapping? Yo? Oh, I know my age, obviously, does not qualify me to even attempt to rap, so I'll keep quiet and do what I'm supposed to do. Certainly thank you, Dr. Alexander, for the introduction, and Bill Ward, former professor of history, former chair of the history department, former mayor of the city of Chesapeake. I'm happy to be back on campus and to introduce the program and our distinguished speaker of the hour. But as a backdrop to why we're here and what we're doing today, I think it's important from a historical perspective to look back into the 1960s very briefly, because the 1960s is an important decade. Finally, with the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Civil Rights Act of 64, Fair Housing Act of 68, it appeared that the civil rights movement had come to an end, that victory had been won, and that we had overcome, because now we could vote, we had free access to wherever we wanted to go, and simply housing. So that's kind of the backdrop. As we move into the 1970s and the 1980s, we found that the civil rights movement was winding down, and that African Americans and other excluded people in this country felt that things had changed for them. In fact, conditions worsened, certainly for the most part in urban America. We find that the heroes of the 1960s struggle for freedom, justice, and equality, certainly in urban America, those leaders they were gone. The Panthers, the Weathermen, other groups that caught our imagination as the urban guerrillas and crusaders for freedom, justice, and equality. Many of them were either in jail, dead, or fled to some foreign country. Suddenly, the songs of the civil rights movement were replaced by a new genre. And out of this new environment came a new type of music that excited, scared the hell out of a lot of people, frightened the nation. We refer to it as Gangster Rap. Time does not provide here me the time to try to trace the evolution of Gangster Rap, to identify all of its variations and its leaders. In fact, I'm not even qualified to do that. That's why we have a speaker today. So, at this time, it's certainly my great pleasure to bring to us today Dr. Benjamin Bowser, who has roots here in Hampton Roads, Professor Emeritus at California State University, East Bay, interestingly a native of New York, a resident of Oakland, so he can bridge the gap between East and West rap. A distinguished scholar, one who has written prolifically. I have a 5-page bio, which I shall not read because we want to hear more about the subject. But I think it's important to note that this gentleman is a researcher, a scholar, an author of many, many books and articles, and has received many awards for his distinguished scholarship, and we'll learn more about that today. BA from Franklin Marshall College, a PhD from Cornell University, and the subject matter that he will discuss today is before you, but he was inspired because he is not as old as I am, so we come from a different age, but our children, my granddaughter is the one who helped me with all of this new music, and his children, his boys, inspired him. Dad, with all your research skills, why don't you look at Gangster Rap? So he was in France somewhere, and he heard Gangster Rap in its most raw and purest form. And so he began to research, and so at this time, it's my pleasure to bring to the Norfolk State University audience, Dr. Benjamin F. Bowser.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. With that, I don't have to explain why a gray-headed scholar is standing up here talking about gangster rap. You know, my 3 sons insisted that I get involved, and they told me that you can't do this if you don't listen to the music. And And then as I listened to the music, and they told me, well, you can't do it if you don't interview the people who are engaged in it. So I started interviewing the people who are engaged in it. And the more I got into it, the more intrigued I found, and then the more I realized why my students were saying to me for years, Dr. Bowser, you have to look at hip-hop and gangster rap. Just one little diversion. I'm a sociologist, I'm not a historian. And in a few minutes I'm going to tell you what the connection is between 1619 and this music. But as a research sociologist, I spent close to 25 years doing HIV/AIDS prevention work, which entailed interviewing crack addicts and heroin addicts and, you know, all of the really the rough folks on the street. And all during this time, I'm hearing this music and, you know, while they're tweaking and so forth. And then interviewing pimps and gangsters and so forth. By the way, you have to do that in order to stop epidemics. We were successful in holding down the rate of HIV in Oakland and San Francisco and New York through epidemiology. But in order to do epidemiology, you also have to understand the culture of the people who you're working with, as well as their history. So with that, let me share with you what I found. And first of all, let's see, if you are interested in looking up this work, I'll remind you at the end, it's all in a book that is there for you. You do not want to, I'm probably the first author you're going to run into who says, don't buy my hardback. It's stupid expensive, but there is a student version of it for $25 that you can go online to the publisher or through Amazon.com and you can get it from there. But anyway, let me show you what I found. What I found is that there is a huge difference, people, between hip-hop and gangster rap. In fact, not only is there a difference between the two are diametrically opposed to each other, living in the same space. And they're living in the same space largely because people don't know that there is a difference between the two. First of all, hip-hop came out of the South Bronx. Many of you already know this, but for those of you who don't, I'm going to review this point. And the South Bronx in the 70s was something quite unlike what you might know of here in Virginia or North Carolina. It was ethnically mixed, and people from the United States and immigrants from all over the world. And in the South Bronx at this time, there were street gangs, but they were not street gangs as we ordinarily know of street gangs. These were street gangs that were primarily there to defend regular, ordinary people in their neighborhoods. And what were they defending them against? They were defending them against drug addicts, heroin addicts, crack addicts. I'm glad to see that many of you in here aren't old enough to know that period, but there was a period in the 80s and 90s where in many of our urban centers you could not go home without being accosted by somebody wanting money from you and so forth. So these gangs were there to protect their mothers, their fathers, and their communities and so on. But eventually, once you get gangs going, then they started fighting each other and at some point began to need a peace movement. This was the first peace movement between street gangs. And we believe that why this was so different is because these gangs were not initially designed to be the traditional street gangs. They were there for positive purposes. So they started a peace movement among themselves and they called it hip-hop. This is the beginning of the movement. The people who were most prominent in this movement, the members of the gangs were primarily African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, and Puerto Ricans. part of the mix of the Bronx. And as they began to define what constituted hip-hop, they, what did I do here? There we go. They decided that there were 4 things that they wanted to concentrate on that were important to them, that were central to the competitions that they wanted between them. And this is what they call the 4 elements. DJing. Now, most people, most older people, of course, think of hip-hop and gangster rap as just music, but it is a philosophy. It is a lifestyle. It is a culture. And it is an artistic movement, all in one. And as part of the lifestyle and artistic movement, these are the 4 elements that were expressed as central to anyone who is engaged in hip-hop. That is the DJing, the disc jockey. Interestingly, not live music, but the use of discs, and of course there were innovations in that, and scratching and so forth, which I won't go into. MCing. If any of you are from Caribbean roots, you know that MCing is hugely important out of Jamaica and Trinidad and Barbados. MCing is when you go to any community event in any of these islands, you get up on the stage, and half of the entertainment are not the artist playing, but rather the person who is commentating, because they know people in the audience, and so they go back and forth with each other, rapping and capping on one another in the audience and so forth. And it is an art in the Caribbean. This was brought to New York, to the Bronx, and became part of hip-hop. B-boy, breakdancing, so forth. This became the central element of the competition between the groups, the emphasis was on innovative movements, innovation, doing stuff that no one had ever seen before. And that's what they did. And of course, then there was graffiti writing. Now, graffiti writing, of course, can get you in a great deal of trouble. You know what graffiti writing is? Yes, no? I'm not getting it. Yeah, okay. You know what graffiti writing is. Well, in the South Bronx, graffiti writing was not a problem. It was not a problem because of this. You had the whole borough as your template, as your canvas, because of the abandonment. This is the physical framework out of which hip-hop comes. Okay? And it's important. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But graffiti writing was hugely important, because you could literally go into any abandoned building and do your mural, and you didn't have to have any prior experience or knowledge of painting. In fact, after a couple of years of this, you could become a quite skilled mural artist with no formal training whatsoever, because you had multiple buildings in which to work, multiple floors. You're talking about any building, 6 stories, landings, apartments, and so forth, all abandoned, that you could work on. Let's define hip-hop. We need to do this before we get to the gangster stuff. Hip-hop is an open philosophy that says, come as you are, we're family. It's not about security. It's not about me being better than you and you being better than me. These are the essential elements. When I interviewed Africana Babata and DJ Cool Heck, these are the things that they kept repeating over and over again. This was what they were about. And if you think about this, this is what, if you were in a street gang, then this is what you're going to emphasize. And it's about connecting one-on-one. Now, let's make a distinction between rap. Often people say hip-hop, gangster rap is all one and the same thing. Well, it's not. Rap is much older and is the creative use of words, indirect. We can go on and on, go all the way back to the African roots of rapping, which of course is part of hip-hop, but it is not specific to hip-hop. Then, as I pointed out, this is the environment. As I go on for the next few slides, you want to keep this in mind. Because one of the things that comes out of an environment like this is that you're not very optimistic about political solutions to things, okay? And you say, well, if this is what it looked like, where did they live? It turns out that all of the founders of the hip-hop movement lived in public housing in the Bronx. Public housing. They live in private rental housing. This is what's left of the rental housing. They lived in island communities that existed because they were public housing, because the city Department of Public Housing took care of those buildings, and they were the only buildings that existed, in some cases, for over a square mile. Okay? So these were people who were looking outside their window every day, seeing apartments on fire, and the police, the fire department never coming to put out the fire, seeing drug addicts taking over whole buildings, and saying, okay, calling the police, and the police come where? What? I mean, this is part of New York that the police department would not serve. And if you had a fire, the fire department would not come and put out the fire, just burn. And there was a whole economy in New York at this time of people who would go into parts of the South Bronx to tear out the parts, elevator parts, copper pipes and so forth, and made a living off of this because the buildings were abandoned. So, you know, who cares? Take it. And that's the way they made their living. So this is a philosophy that's intentionally open. The founders of the movement wanted this philosophy to be open so that if you were in hip-hop in Norfolk, Virginia, you could define it yourself. That definition would not come from New York, okay? They were very clear about that. They wanted to just be a general framework, and then you fill in the blanks. It is a social movement that has not been formally studied. It should be. There is philosophy here, people. There's real philosophy and should be viewed as that, but for the most part it has not been looked at, and I'll get to the reasons why. It's indifferent to black nationalism. You must remember the founders of the movement were the children of nationalists. And they were children who grew up recognizing what they viewed as the failure of the nationalist movement because, well, do I need to say more? Okay? If this is the results of the civil rights movement, their attitude was, well, we don't need more of that. Okay? So they were indifferent to it. Furthermore, the young people from the Caribbean background were indifferent to civil rights and to nationalism because they were in New York as refugees from Trinidad, from Jamaica, from Barbados, from the Dominican Republic, so forth, precisely because of the failure of black governments to address the economic problems in the Caribbean. Their parents were in New York because the unemployment rates were 50, 60, 70% on these islands. So either you had to go to New York or go to London or starve to death. Okay? And so their attitude was, well, if this is what happens with black independence, we don't need that either. So as a result, this movement that came out of their head did not at that point have a political content because basically that was going nowhere. And so it focused on art and creative expression. So this is what came out of it. Now, with that background, and I apologize for it being so brief, but obviously in the book we go into much greater detail. We now can start talking about what's the difference between hip-hop and gangster rap. The earliest critics of gangster rap were the founders of the hip-hop movement. So when you identify yourself as hip-hop, you are also identifying yourself with the earliest critiques of gangster rap, because the first thing they did was wanted to distinguish themselves from those who saw the movement or who would take the movement as a materialistic, status-seeking event. If you're going to be one-on-one with one another, it's not about status and it's certainly not about money. So then where did this thing come in where, you know, we're about sneakers and fashions and music that makes money or doesn't make money? These are essential contradictions within the movement. Russell Brown did a fabulous content analysis on the lyrics that are embedded in what is considered gangster rap or hip hop now, found that the distinction is the following. We can clearly distinguish hip hop from gangster rap. One of the first things my students ask me is, well, how do you tell the difference between the two? Okay? How can you possibly tell the difference? Well, here's the difference. If you hear music that focuses on using crude terminology in reference to women, it is gangster, it is not hip hop. Okay, that's the first. There are about 12 of these, but I'm focusing on only the top ones. Glorification of gang activities. Now, there are hip hoppers who talk about gangs, but they don't glorify it. They don't say, hey, this is what we need to do, this is what we're about, this is what we love to do. You know, we're chilling, we're riding, we're doing whatever. The hip hoppers have generally a commentary about this. They have some point of view about gang activity and gangster movements and so forth. And they have a comment on the use of firearms and drugs. While gangster rappers say this, drugs are cool, we're selling it, we're using it, that's generally the narrative that goes through there. Professing sexual prowess and domination, male sexual prowess and domination, is clearly part of it. So this is gangster, you can tell. Finally, one of the huge keys is the portrayal of prison sentence as a routine fact of life. Okay? Now, I'm going to get to where this stuff goes in a moment from a psychological standpoint, but let's lay it out first, what it is and what it is not. Okay? Now, you're saying in your head, well, who's gangster and who's hip-hop and who's who and who's what? Now, I'll tell you right from the beginning, this slide, you will say as well, it's about 10 years old now, and that's intentional. Because I want to use the classic people, the people from whom current music is derived. So we have Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Tupac, 50 Cent, excuse me, Jay-Z and Lil Jon as being prototypical. I mean, these guys, you listen to the music over and over and over again, you're going to hear those themes over and over and over and over again. You listen to the people on this side of the board, you're going to hear, occasionally you're going to hear something, but for the most part, you're not going to hear those themes as the dominant part of their music. They have something else to say. Okay? Now, this gets to the most important part of this distinction. And the most important part of the distinction is, who is the audience? It wasn't until about 6 years ago that we had good information, good data on audience. By the way, everything I'm telling you here is not based on, you know, me waking up one morning and saying, well, that's the way it is. This comes out of now research that is showing up, that is beginning to be developed by people on these issues. And the most important question is audience. Because, you know, the rappers or gangster rappers would say, well, this is black music by black people that white people just happen to be listening to. And if you don't like it, then too bad, it's not for you because it's black people's music. Yet, what we find out is that the dominant audience, the predominant audience for gangster rap are white males between 13 and 19 years old. Boom. I can almost rest my case with that. Now, if you're in here African American and thinking this is black music and so forth, I'm sorry, it is not your music. It is not for you. It's not for you. Okay? And I'm going to get to the corporate backing behind as to why it's not for you. We now have evidence as the fact that it is definitely not for you. Okay? So it's primarily a white audience, and it's designed intentionally for that purpose. Just in case you're asleep out there, just Now, what's the connection between gangster, hip-hop, and 1619? As a sociologist, I have to find the roots of these issues. And it turns out that what is attractive to what the corporate music industry has decided should be important to white males between 13 and 19 years old you can only understand what they consider to be important from a historical standpoint. Because there are images that they have wanted to be portrayed in this music that come from historical data. So, as a sociologist, I have to go into history in order to really understand what it is that they're after. And what are they after? They are rendering racial stereotypes straight from the 19th century. And if you want to know where these stereotypes come from, and you want to see a whole literature on how they have been developed and what they are, you have to go to the minstrel show. Minstrel show. Now, this particular fact is so strong that in the 45 books that have been written on gangster and hip-hop and so forth by both critics and supporters, they all agree to the fact that this music is rendering racial stereotypes. So the critics are saying the same thing. The proponents of it are saying the same thing. And when you interview the artists and you ask them, well, do you know that you're doing da-da-da-da-da? Those kind of say, well, yeah, we kind of know this. And I'll get into how they know this in a moment. But the fact of the matter is, it is the minstrel stereotypes that we thought we killed in the 1960s. We thought we put Amos and Andy to rest. We thought we put Kingfish down, put a metal stake through his heart in 61, 62. But it turned out that the industry reinvented Kingfish and Amos all over again, but in a different form, and are now making billions from them. So now, let's look at these stereotypes. Which ones? There are about 15 of them, but there are ones that have been used specifically here. First one, happy, free, civil, uncivil, natural entertainers. Okay, you've heard that before. You grew up, when you were born, you had natural ability. You could dance, sing, right? Okay, wrong. The first James Brown, 1810. Anybody know who these people are?
Well, Hammer?
Hammer! MC Hammer, 1990. Now, why am I picking on poor Hammer? Because MC Hammer started dance in Gangsta. The first expression of dance in Gangsta was formalized by MC. And everything else has come from that. There's a Harvard ethnomusicologist who in fact found this connection between MC and the early James Brown. And in fact, it claims that the steps that they had there are almost identical. But yet, I'm certain MC had no idea about the early James Brown. So, culturally, you have to ask yourself, how is it that people could dance in the same way almost 200 years later and have almost the same movements for the same audience? So some kind of message is being portrayed there. Moody, violent, unable to exercise self-control and must be controlled by others. Henderson, I mean, this is how a white cop, not a black cop, a white cop can get out of his car, have all the guns and all the violence in the world on his hip, and be afraid of a black man who is unarmed and has his hands up. For this reason, because this person believes that this person is moody, unpredictable, can almost turn around Zorro-ish and just take their tongue and just wrap them around in some kind of way or another. You don't need to have a gun. He's just violent because he is. Okay? Who's that? 50 Cent. Okay? So what am I doing here? I'm connecting 19th century racial stereotypical images with the bad boys. Okay? Now you say, well, I don't think 50 Cent is violent or another. Well, if you're saying that, you have to remember, this is not for you. 13 and 19-year-old white kids who are not in this university, who have no exposure to black people, really, and that's most white kids. They don't know what's going on in the hood. They don't know what black people look like or anything, and no reality about them. And they get this music, and boom, it's like, oh my God, So these stereotypes are presented to them through this music, and it makes money for the industry. Dirty, immorally perverse, pleasure-seeking, ignorant and superstitious. Okay? That's T.D. Rice down there. My boy. Okay? The heir apparent to T.D. Rice is Lil Jon. Okay? Now, I think I have a feeling I'm raining on some of your impressions as to what you're going on here. There are only a couple more of these. 19th century imagery carried over into the present. Vogue magazine, incapable of sexual discretion and restraint, especially with white women. Oh, that's a big one, okay? Now, you may run me out of town when I show you this one. Who comes closest to this one? Some of you all love this brother. Okay? Now, poor Tupac, he was only about 5'4". When was the last time you saw a brother walking down the street with his pants hanging down in the front with a Glock stuck in his crotch? Now, I've been in some of the roughest communities in the West Coast and East Coast, and I've talked to some of the roughest people, and I've asked them, I said, have you seen a brother look like that? And the answer is, it wouldn't last 5 minutes in my hood, because the local thugs would take it, we don't have to worry about the police, the local thugs would take his behind out. Okay? And furthermore, how do you walk around with a gun that heavy in your crotch and not lose your pants? And furthermore, to give you another little indication of how the street would take this, you walking around with a gold chain around your neck like that? Oh, you are asking to get your ass whooped. Okay? So, anybody who knows anything about the hood knows that this is ridiculous. This is total nonsense. So the only way you can take this seriously is you got to be from someplace outside of the hood in order to see anything like this or another. But the whole point is the stereotypical conversions and transference is what's important here. When you can take a little 5'4" dude and make him fulfill, certainly he's not LeBron James. Okay? Finally, the final distinction of how you tell gangster from hip-hop is the use of the N-word. Okay? By the way, the intentionality behind gangster rap is so strong in the use of the N-word that you cannot do gangster without the N-word. You can't do it. It doesn't work. I've even done it. I've taken the music, I have bleeped out the N-word wherever they use it, and then replayed it. It don't say, I mean, it's pathetic. If you don't have the N-word, it makes no sense. And the people who are proponents of this will tell you that as well. Finally, I have white students who've gone out and done class projects on by interviewing Klan and Nazi skinheads. And they have come back reporting that the Klan and the skinheads are delighted. They love gangster. They know the distinction. They don't like hip hop. They love gangster. Skinheads, Klan. In fact, one of them pointed out to me that the most popular of the white Aryan musical groups is called the White Aryans. And they have their best-selling record is called Death in Browntown. And if you listen to it, they are singing in support of the gangsters. And their lyrics go something to the effect of, we don't have to kill niggas because the niggas are killing themselves with their gangster shit, ha 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 ha. I mean, you almost don't need any more of that. Now, let's do a little cultural psychiatry here. For gangster and minstrel to work, you gotta use the N-word. This is Lil Jon playing about all his niggas. I'm certain you've heard it. I picked it especially because it's been played a lot here in Norfolk. But the idea is this is music that is full of the N-word, works only with the N-word. You will laugh with it, but in fact, it's not funny at all. Because in effect, it is the internalization of the minstrel imagery that makes it funny, that makes it work as music. I won't use that, but according to Ice-T, removing the N-word from lyrics makes it just a piece of popular music, so it doesn't work. So, what are the impacts of gangster rap? What are the impacts of it on listeners? And here again, this is right for student papers, for student projects, and so forth. There's a burgeoning literature now on the effects of this music on listeners. And we now have evidence that gangster rap is a contributor to the high rate of black-on-black youth crime. Black-on-black youth crime started up when this music appeared. And we keep saying, we don't know why these kids out there killing themselves in the way that they are. And almost invariably, the kids who are killing each other are heavy listeners of the music. Now, we cannot prove directly that the music is the cause of their violence, but it is certainly a primer or prime conditioner for the violence. So when you have one young black man walk up to another one and says, I don't like the way you look at me, and blows him away, where did that come from? You interview this young man and you find out, well, you know, where did you get a script like that says, I don't like somebody, I'm gonna blow them away? And you almost can predict who the artists are who they listen to. As such that now the Association of Black Psychologists are recommending to black clinicians and therapists that they engage in what is called hip-hop therapy, where you have to understand the music that the person listens to in order to understand their pathologies, because the music is reflective of those pathologies. Secondly, materialism. This business that you ain't shit without a lot of money and women. You don't have a lot of women, a lot of money, you know the expression. you know, I won't even say what they are. I don't know what they are here. I know what they are in Oakland. You know, money talks and bullshit walks, something to that line, so forth. This whole sense of self being defined by money is something that is part of this movement. Finally, the most devastating effect, single most devastating effect of gangster rap is on young black women. The younger they are, and the more they listen to gangster, the lower their self-esteem, and the more they hate themselves. Because the music is systematic about dehumanizing and eliminating any sense of self-esteem. Then, of course, to black-white relations, male-female relations, oh my God. I am so happy I'm not in your generation. And the reason I'm happy I'm not in it is because I wouldn't be able to get a date. Okay? How do you go out and date somebody when you're calling them bitches? How do you do that? How do you abuse women in the way that they're abused in the music and expect that you're going to have a relationship with them? So it is devastating to black-female relations. And finally, young men who are led to feel that they are not hard enough if they're not victims of violence. Thank you. So if you're not hard enough, and this of course is an excuse for violence for victimization, this is a contributor to the belief that many young men who will not live until 30. A lot of young guys, I'm very happy to see young black men especially in this audience, because in the Cal State system we've seen a decline, precipitous decline in the number of young black men in college, because so many believe, I'm not going to live to be 30, so why the hell should I invest in going to college or anything? And it's coming again out of this movement, out of this, not the movement, out of gangster, confused as hip-hop. Okay? And finally, education is not worth anything and is acting white. That is directly out of gangster. I know some of you have struggled with that particular view because you're in college and you got people back in the neighborhood saying, oh yeah, you're getting white, you know? How is it, you know, well, I won't go into that. You already know what that's all about. Finally, it gets into the issue of who's the bitch? Well, I don't hear anything out there, so. About 10 years ago, I rode a bus in Oakland, and the first time I heard a woman refer to her man as her bitch. And then I started hearing this more and more and more and more and more, women referring to their men as they bitch. Okay? And then started looking at this and saying, oh, now wait a minute, what's going on here? Well, when you have a internalization of these menstrual stereotypes in your mind, in your imagery, that have been internalized into yourself, that you have self-accepted, then you put yourself in a very odd position. So an example of racial self-disdain and internalizing stereotypes, we can now look at people's behavior, their dress, and so forth, and we can tell precisely where they're coming from inside their head. And, hello? Now, let's look at this for a minute. Is this about attracting women? No, I mean, what's attracting women, you have your pants down in the front. Like Tupac, okay? You have it in the front with your piece up here, okay? Hey baby, how you doing? Have it in the back? had to figure this one out. So every time I talk with somebody from jail, I ask them, and you know, where did this come from? It comes from jail. It comes from in jail. I mean, look, one thing you cannot do in jail is make a mistake as to who's the man and who's the woman. If you mistake who the woman, if you mistake some man for a woman, you're going to have to fight for your life. So you have to have some way in jail of knowing who's available and who's not. Okay? So you walk around with your pants hanging down if you're available. And then somehow or another this comes out of jail and becomes high fashion in the gangster world, okay? Well, I mean, I think that's fairly obvious. California prison. So, you know, one of the things, anybody who's been to prison comes out of prison, they come out in the street and they see young men walking around with their pants down like this. They are laughing, okay? Because, you know, it means something very different in a jail setting than here. All right. Now, this is not devastating to just black people. It has a particular effect on white people. In fact, the music Gangsta is for white people primarily, okay? So it teaches the 19th century racial stereotypes to young white men and women who have no other context to learn them in. They wouldn't know these stereotypes if they didn't hear this music. Secondly, for skinheads and Nazis and Klansmen and so forth, this is now an excuse to go out in the street and call black people niggas. Okay? And then if you ask them, well, why did you call me a nigger? They say, well, I'm just being friendly. I like you. I mean, you know, your people do it in the music, so why can't I? And that's exactly what they're doing. So now we have racists using the N-word, not just for young black people, they're using it for against adults and so forth. And then, of course, increases fear of black people and the need for racial segregation and isolation. That's in this older group. I bet you there is a connection between the sheer meanness that you're getting from 60, 65-year-old white people in this country around the issue of race after hearing this particular music. And I've interviewed some white parents and said, well, what do you think about your kids listening to Gangsta? Ooh, open that door. Okay? They are not happy at all. And because they're racist, they're not happy because they understand the stereotypes that their kids are picking up, and they understand that this is low-class, trashy stuff that has found its way into the mainstream and is now affecting their own children. Okay? And I'll skip that. This is a little fun thing I had. It's a little puzzle. If I had some more time, we'd work on this. And then potential. Hip-hop has potential for political consciousness and action. Then one of the main contributors of the younger generation is hip-hop, not gangster, hip-hop. Hip-hop without gangster is powerful. Okay? And there it is. Thank you very much. Yeah, we have, I managed to stop about 5 minutes before we are breaking. And so we've got a few minutes for Q&A. Way down.
Come up front.
Come on up here. Come on.
All right.
And I'll try to be brief.
If Emily Rose is in the audience, please see me before you leave.
Hello? Hi. I have a question. Did you think about your age group when you had started this research and how it would affect your way that you saw hip hop in rap. And look,
How old, the age group?
Like your age group, did you see, did you think about your age group when you had started some research behind it?
Yeah, he asked me, what did I think about my age group? Yes, I did, because I've been involved with a number of community groups in San Jose, California, that were investigating violence in the high schools in San Jose. And there were adults, black adults, walking down the street, all of a sudden getting called nigger. So as part of the community groups, we started investigating that and traced it back to gangster rap music that was in the music. So it came at me from all ends. Young people would tell me about it, and then I had older people telling me that, looking at issues that they were concerned with that affected them as well.
I think this thing is this on?
No, it's not on, so.
Okay, young lady.
You talked about the minstrel, like you compared minstrel images of men and then the minstrel images of gangster rappers. And then you talked about how it influenced the self-esteem of black women in the music. Do you have comparisons of the minstrel ideas of black women and how that is perpetuated inside the music?
Very good question. In the music, gangsta is paternalistic. It does not recognize women as anything other than subordinate. So when you get to people like Missy Elliott and so forth, there are women in gangster, but they gotta be gangster bitches. They can't just be women. And this is one of the reasons you have people like Lauryn Hill and others who are avoiding the tag or the image of being hip hop and gangster, because they don't want to be associated with that. They want to be able to have a wider venue of music to express themselves in and so forth. And I'm very happy to see that that is breaking down, that many people are now recognizing the distinction between hip hop and gangster, and therefore can effectively identify which side they want to be on. But the gangster side is so anti-women that it both is against women as artists and against women as non-artists. So, you know, it seems like it's all a bunch of men, and it's intentionally so.
All right, so two-part question. First part, would you say that we are in a post-racial society? And if you believe we are not, and that there is a continuance of white supremacy and institutional racism, how would you account for gangster rappers, quote unquote, being impacted by white supremacy and institutional racism? And how would you distinguish between the impact of racism on those other things you described, such as black on black crime, etc.? How do you distinguish between, oh, this is gangster rap, or this is institutional racism?
I believe gangster rap is an actual instrument of oppression. Okay? It is an instrument. It is designed intentionally to do what it is to do. So there's no contradiction here. So if you have an instrument that is designed to perpetrate violence in order to entertain America, then when you get that violence, you're kind of saying, okay, well, that's cool. That's kind of what we want. So there's no contradiction there. It's an instrument of violence, not just it's not a coincidence. I once worked in advertising, and I know nothing that comes out into the public is not fully vetted by attorneys, by people familiar with culture and history and so forth. They know exactly what is coming out. And the people who manage the gangster rappers, if the rappers don't know, their managers do know, and either are telling them or not.
I'm getting a signal from my bosses, but we will take the last three. So, young lady, and you already had yours, so we have to get these three.
Thank you for your presentation. I do have a question about the burden of representation, I guess, when we think about hip hop and gangster rap music, and it's when you think about conscious rap, and how that burden is often placed onto Black people and their music, and or even in any forms of their art, and that same consciousness isn't placed or burdened onto white people and their music or in their representations of art. And how can that be constructive but also destructive to images of blackness? And if you've considered that, or if you have any thoughts on that.
This is why the hip-hop movement and music and hip-hop is so important, because it can address precisely the issue of representation and non-representation, both among whites and blacks, Hispanics, Puerto Ricans, I mean, everyone. And the place to really see that is to go overseas. And you see the success of the hip-hop movement overseas is largely around the definition, the critical definition of self within French society, the critical definition of self within Canadian society, and so forth. Before this invitation, I've had invitations to do this presentation. They were all overseas. Costa Rica, Paris, Canada, and so forth, but the US is conflicted around this. But people overseas understand this immediately, the power of hip-hop.
My question is, with Gangster Rap, it came from, because there were gangs before Gangster Rap, and then Gangster Rap could have been derived from it, and then the industry just placed it and just made a push for it. What do you think about like how that was taken care of, how that was used, I guess you could say?
When Dr. Dre started Death Row Records, they essentially were producing racial pornography. They called it that. They were selling records out of the back of their cars. Anybody who's been to, I mean, you know about blue movies, sexual pornography or whatever. Well, this was musical pornography. They knew that's what it was, and that's what they were producing, and they thought they were just making money from a bunch of gangs and crazies from out of the back of their car. What happened was that some of these albums got spilled off into Simi Valley in California, into the middle-class white community, and the white kids ate it up, okay? And they found that instead of being in the pornography bin where they should have been, they were on a #1 hit and didn't know it. And Dr. Dre will say he was more shocked than anybody else that was the case. And so when that happened, it immediately got out of his hands. They lost control of it because the record industry, the 5 major corporations, which I didn't get into, the 5 major corporations then picked up on that and said, oh, no kidding, okay? And next thing he knew, he had a contract from Interscope to do more of these records. Dr. Dre didn't have a checkbook. He didn't know what a bank account looked like. He didn't have an attorney to vet any of this stuff. The only reason these people aren't in jail is because major corporations have backed them by taxes, attorneys, financing, and so forth. Major corporations are behind this stuff. So when they realized it had that kind of takeoff, it just went wild. It was out of the control of black people.
Last question.
How you doing? My question was, do you think that the rap game will be able to change? Like hip hop, overcome, gangster rap? Because right now the game is terrible. I'm young, I listen to it, but I still know, because it's like a lot of artists that's been coming out like lately, and they just they're not even saying anything. And I'm like, how is this even a song? Like, why is it, on the radio? So yeah, you think, eventually it will change out, because right now, you got artists, they wearing real tight pants, the boys and stuff, so they starting to look like girls now, so I'm just...
I'm optimistic. Yes, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because there is a learning curve going on, largely in the young community and especially in the hip-hop community, where they're recognizing that You know, for a while they tried to coexist with the gangster people and realized the gangster people are gangster. Well, they are, and they're not going to take anything else. So now you're seeing a separation. You're seeing, and with that separation, you're also seeing people in the gangster effort trying to now pull people in hip-hop into their thing. Like Drake, for example, it's a good example. Drake came out screaming on the hip-hop side, and then they said, oh, no, come on, Drake, we want to invite you to parties and all this stuff. And so they're recognizing that, that the hip-hop movement is getting stronger and stronger. If nothing else, it has succeeded overseas. Hip-hop is powerful overseas, and I'm expecting at some point it's going to come back to positively influence events here, if Americans ever stop looking at themselves.
This show got developed with a lot. Obviously, he has stimulated much thought, much discussion, and Dr. Neely, I would recommend that we invite him back for next year.